What I saw stopped me cold. Karen wasn't playing tennis. She was standing off to the side, wrapped up in this close, intimate hug with her coach, Brad. Yeah, Brad. The guy's in his late 30s, tanned, ripped, and always smirking like he knows he's hot stuff. I'd noticed her talking about him more than usual over the past few months. Brad said this, Brad recommended that, but I figured it was harmless. Seeing him like that, though, it wasn't just a friendly hug. His hands were too low, hers were too lingering, and they were way too close for comfort. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. Was I overreacting? Was this just some weird misunderstanding? I mean, people hug, right? But as I watched them pull apart, she reached up and brushed his cheek with her hand, and he leaned down like he was about to kiss her. That was all I needed to see. I stormed into the court, and they jumped apart like guilty teenagers caught by a parent. Ethan, Karen said, her voice too loud, too fake cheerful. What are you doing here? I should be asking you that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What the hell is going on? Brad just stood there, his smirk replaced with a look that screamed, OS asterisk asterisk to asterisk. Karen laughed like this was some kind of joke. Don't be ridiculous, she said. We were just stretching. Stretching? I repeated, my voice rising. Do I look stupid to you? She rolled her eyes, and that's when I felt the first flicker of real anger. Ethan, you're embarrassing yourself, she said, her tone dripping with annoyance. I'll explain later. Go play your little game. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. She wasn't even trying to deny it. She wasn't apologizing or acting guilty. She was just dismissing me. Brad mumbled something about needing to check on another class and bolted, leaving me and Karen alone. Karen, I said, my voice shaking. What the hell is going on with you and Brad? Nothing, she snapped, crossing her arms. You're being paranoid. He's my coach. That's it. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she avoided my eyes, the way she brushed past me like I didn't matter, it felt like someone had punched me in the gut. She grabbed her gym bag and stormed out of the court, leaving me standing there like an idiot. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept replaying in my head. You're being paranoid. Was I? Or was she gaslighting me into thinking I was crazy? The next day, I decided to dig deeper. Karen had left for work early, and her phone was sitting on the counter. She never lets it out of her sight, so this was my chance. I know snooping isn't exactly the most moral thing to do, but at that moment, I didn't care. I unlocked her phone. Her passcode is our anniversary, go figure, and went straight to her messages. Most of them were boring, texts from her sister, a group chat with her tennis buddies, but then I found a thread with Brad. It wasn't what I was expecting. No explicit texts, no professions of love. Just casual messages about tennis schedules, meal plans, and a few inside jokes I didn't understand. Maybe I really was overreacting. But just as I was about to put the phone down, a notification popped up on her screen. It was a message from a number saved as B. Can't wait for tonight. You looked incredible yesterday. My stomach dropped. Who the hell was B? I scrolled through the message thread, my hands shaking. The texts were flirty, intimate, and way too familiar. I'll book the room this time. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. You're so much more fun than Ethan. My heart pounded as I read the words. So it wasn't just Brad. There was someone else. When Karen came home that night, I tried to act normal. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to process everything. But every time she smiled at me, every time she asked me about my day, it felt like a slap in the face. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence. I checked her phone whenever I had the chance, looking for clues about B. I started paying closer attention to her schedule, noticing the nights she came home late or left early without explanation. And then I found it, a hotel receipt in her purse. The date matched one of the texts from B, and the room was booked under the name Brandon King. Brandon King. Who the hell was Brandon King? At this point, I didn't know what to think. Was Karen cheating on me with Brad? Brandon? Both? Was she stringing me along while sneaking around with half the town? The uncertainty was killing me, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It was time to confront her. I couldn't stop thinking about the hotel receipt. It was the final nail in the coffin, the thing that turned my suspicions into cold, hard proof. Who was Brandon King? And why was my wife sneaking off to hotels with him? The answer was obvious, but part of me still clung to denial. Maybe there was some innocent explanation. Maybe Brandon was just a friend, or a colleague, or hell, I don't know, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. That night, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. Karen came home around 8 p.m., carrying a takeout bag and acting like nothing was wrong. "Hey," she said, flashing me a smile. I picked up Ty. "Your favorite." It was almost laughable. My favorite? The woman sneaking around with Brandon King suddenly cared about my favorite food? I waited until we were done eating. The kids were upstairs, the dishes were in the sink, and Karen was scrolling through her phone on the couch. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up, her smile faltering. "About what?" "About this," I said, pulling the hotel receipt from my pocket and slapping it on the coffee table. Her eyes flicked to the paper, and for a moment, she froze. Then, she laughed, a short, sharp laugh that made my blood boil. "Seriously, Ethan?" she said, rolling her eyes. "You're going through my stuff now?" "Don't deflect," I snapped. "Explain this." She sighed, crossing her arms. "It's nothing. A work thing." "A work thing?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're a fitness instructor's assistant, Karen. What kind of work thing requires booking a hotel room under someone else's name?" Her face reddened, and she stood up, glaring at me. "You don't get it, do you? I'm allowed to have a life outside of you." That's when I lost it. "A life outside of me?" I shouted, standing to face her. "Is that what you call sneaking around with Brad? And Brandon? And God knows who else?" Her eyes narrowed, and she jabbed a finger at my chest. "You're paranoid, Ethan. You've always been paranoid. This is why I need space." "Space?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Is that what Brandon gives you? Space?" She flinched, but her expression quickly turned defiant. "You know what?" she said, grabbing her purse. "I don't have to deal with this. I'm going out." She stormed out of the house before I could say another word. I stood there, my chest heaving, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a weight. She didn't even try to deny it. She didn't apologize, didn't explain. She just left. I spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, my mind racing. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She was guilty, and she didn't even care enough to hide it anymore. But if she thought she could walk all over me and get away with it, she was wrong. Dead wrong. The next day, I called the hotel. I didn't think they'd give me any information, but I had to try. "Hi," I said, doing my best to sound casual. "I stayed at your hotel recently, but I lost my receipt. Can you help me get a copy?" The receptionist asked for the name and date, and I gave her Brandon King's info from the receipt. "Let me check," she said. I held my breath, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, she came back on the line. "Yes, we have that reservation. Room 317. Would you like me to email you a copy of the receipt?" My stomach churned. "No, that's okay. Thanks. Room 317. That was the detail I needed. That evening, Karen came home acting like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and started making dinner like we were a normal, happy couple. It was almost impressive, the way she could pretend everything was fine. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. After dinner, I told her I had to run an errand. I drove to the hotel. The lobby was quiet, the faint hum of an elevator and the clicking of keyboards from the front desk breaking the silence. I approached the desk, my heart pounding. "Hi," I said to the receptionist. "I think I left something in room 317 a few days ago. Is there any way I could check?" She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you the guest who stayed there?" "Yes," I lied, forcing a smile. She nodded. "Let me grab the key for you." The elevator ride to the third floor felt like an eternity. When I reached the room, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What was I hoping to find? A love note? A pair of Karen's earrings? Or worse, nothing at all? I pushed the door open. The room was clean and empty, the bed neatly made, the surfaces wiped down. But as I stepped inside, something caught my eye. A small scrap of paper on the nightstand. I picked it up, my hands shaking. It was a receipt for 2 glasses of wine from the hotel bar, dated the same night as Brandon's stay. My chest tightened as I stared at the receipt. Karen doesn't drink wine, but I do. That's when it hit me. Brandon King wasn't just some random guy. He was someone I knew. But who? The pieces were starting to come together. But I needed more. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I drove home from the hotel with a heavy knot in my stomach. The receipt was still clenched in my hand, the name Brandon King replaying in my mind like a broken record. Who the hell was Brandon King? The possibility that it was someone I knew was gnawing at me, but I couldn't figure out why. I racked my brain, thinking of everyone in our circle, friends, acquaintances, co-workers, but the name didn't ring a bell. Not yet. When I got home, Karen was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. "You're late," she said without looking up. I ignored her, walking straight past her to the bedroom. "Ethan," she called after me, her tone annoyed. I didn't answer. In the privacy of the bedroom, I pulled out my laptop and opened Facebook. If Brandon King was someone I knew, social media would have the answer. The search didn't take long. A profile popped up almost immediately. A man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and a cocky smile. His bio read, "Personal trainer, fitness, enthusiast, motivational speaker." And his most recent post? A picture of him and Karen, standing way too close for comfort, with the caption, "Work hard, play harder." My blood ran cold. Brandon King wasn't just someone I knew. He was one of Karen's personal trainers from the gym. I stared at the picture, my chest tightening. Karen had never mentioned him by name, but she talked about the trainers at the gym enough for me to piece it together. Was this the guy she'd been sneaking around with? Was he the one she was meeting at hotels and texting behind my back? I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. That night, I decided to confront her again. After the kids went to bed, I sat her down in the living room. "Who's Brandon King?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. Her eyes widened, and she froze for a split second before laughing nervously. "Why are you asking about Brandon?" "You know why," I said sharply. She sighed, crossing her arms. "He's just one of the trainers at the gym. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the Facebook post, "is that you've been sneaking around with him." Her face reddened, and she opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "Don't lie to me, Karen," I snapped. "I found the hotel receipt. I found the texts. I know about the wine. Just tell me the truth." She stared at me, her expression shifting from guilt to anger. "Fine," she said, her voice sharp. "Yes, I've been spending time with Brandon, but it's not what you think." "Really?" I said bitterly. "Then what is it?" "He's been helping me," she said, her tone defensive. With my fitness goals?" "That's all." "Fitness goals?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Is that what you call meeting him at hotels? Drinking wine with him? Lying to my face?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't buying it. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Then make me understand," I snapped. She hesitated, her tears spilling over. "Brandon's more than a trainer," she admitted. "He's a life coach. He's been helping me work through some things." "Some things?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "What the hell does that even mean, Karen?" "What things?" She looked away, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know how to explain it," she said softly. Her words felt like a slap in the face. She wasn't even trying to come up with a good excuse anymore. I stood up, pacing the room. "You know what? Forget it," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm done listening to your lies." "Ethan, please," she started, but I cut her off. "No," I said sharply. "I've had enough. If you can't tell me the truth, then there's nothing left to say." I went to bed that night feeling angrier and more hurt than ever. Her excuses didn't make sense, and her tears didn't feel genuine. Something about her story still wasn't adding up. The next day, I decided to go straight to the source. I drove to Brandon King's gym, parked outside, and waited until I saw him leave. When he came out, I approached him, my heart pounding. "Brandon," I said, forcing a polite tone. He turned to look at me, his cocky smile faltering slightly. "Ethan, right? Karen's husband?" "That's me," I said. "Can we talk?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." We walked a few steps away from the gym, and I turned to face him. "I'll get straight to the point," I said. "What's going on between you and Karen?" He raised an eyebrow, his smile returning. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean," I said coldly. "Don't play dumb." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Look, man, Karen and I are friends." "That's all." "Friends?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Then why is she sneaking around with you? Why is she lying to me about hotel stays and wine dates?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed his arms and gave me a smug look. "Maybe you should ask her," he said. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over. I'm asking you, I snapped. He shrugged. There's nothing to tell. Karen's an amazing woman. Maybe you should appreciate her more. I wanted to punch him, but I forced myself to walk away. Brandon's smug attitude only made things worse. Was he lying to cover for Karen? Or was there something even bigger going on? As I drove home, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if Brandon wasn't the only one? I drove home from my confrontation with Brandon King feeling more confused and angry than ever. His smug, nonchalant attitude had pushed me to the edge, and his cryptic comment about appreciating Karen more was echoing in my head like a bad song on repeat. Was he just messing with me, or was there something deeper going on? When I got home, Karen wasn't there. Again, her absence wasn't unusual lately. Over the past few weeks, she'd always had some excuse. Gym stuff, meeting a friend, running errands, but now it felt like every second she wasn't home was a slap in the face. I sat in the quiet living room, staring at the clock, my chest tight with anger and suspicion. She finally walked through the door around 9 p.m., carrying a bag from the local grocery store. "Hey," she said casually, dropping the bag on the counter. "Sorry I'm late." The store was packed. I didn't respond. She glanced at me, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" I stood up, crossing my arms. "Where were you, Karen?" Her brow furrowed. "I just told you. The grocery store." "For 3 hours?" I asked, my voice sharp. Her face flushed, and she turned back to unpack the bag. "I ran into Denise," she said, her tone defensive. "We got to talking." "Denise?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Funny, because I called Denise earlier, and she said she hasn't seen you in weeks. Karen froze, her hands gripping a box of cereal. "Are you spying on me now?" she snapped, spinning to face me. "Don't turn this around on me," I shot back. "I'm not the one sneaking around and lying." Her face twisted with anger, but I caught a flicker of something else, guilt. "Ethan, I'm so sick of this," she said, slamming the cereal onto the counter. "You're suffocating me with your paranoia. No wonder I need space." "Space?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call hotel stays with Brandon King? Or hugging Brad like he's your boyfriend?" Her eyes widened, but she quickly masked it with a glare. "I've told you 1,000 times. There's nothing going on with Brad or Brandon. You're being ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" I snapped. "Then why don't you explain the hotel receipt? Or the text from B? Or the fact that you've been lying to my face for weeks?" She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't have to explain anything to you," she said finally, grabbing her purse. "I'm done having this conversation." And with that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, my chest heaving, the quiet house feeling suffocating. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. The next day, I decided I needed more proof. I'd already searched her phone, but there was one place I hadn't looked, her laptop. She rarely used it at home, but she always carried it to the gym, claiming it was for tracking her clients' progress. When she left for her session that morning, I searched the house and found it in her gym bag. I powered it on, my hands shaking as I opened her email. It was like opening Pandora's box. There were dozens of emails between Karen and Brandon, most of them innocent on the surface, gym schedules, meal plans, workout tips. But then I found one that made my blood run cold. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach churned as I read the words. There was no mistaking the context. They weren't talking about workouts. And then I found the calendar invite. Meeting with B. 8 p.m. Hotel, Rivera. The date matched the receipt I'd found in her purse. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. When Karen came home that evening, I was waiting for her. She walked in, her smile fading when she saw the laptop on the coffee table. "Care to explain this?" I asked, pointing to the screen. Her face went pale, and she took a step back. "Ethan, don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me again." Tears filled her eyes, and she sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said softly. "It just got out of control." "What got out of control?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Your friendship with Brandon? Your stretching sessions with Brad? Or all the lies you've been telling me?" She didn't answer. The silence between us was deafening. Finally, I stood up, pacing the room. "Is it just Brandon? I asked, my voice low. Or is there someone else? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm talking about Brad, I said. I'm talking about the hugs, the smiles, the way you act around him. She shook her head, her tears falling. It's not what you think, Ethan. Then what is it? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been sneaking around with half the town. She didn't answer, and that was all the confirmation I needed. That night, as she slept, I sat in the living room, scrolling through the emails again. And that's when I found it. An email from Coach Brad. Let me know when you're free. I'll book the court for us. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. It wasn't just Brandon. Brad was involved too. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, staring at Karen's laptop like it held the secrets of the universe. The email from Brad confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Karen wasn't just sneaking around with Brandon. Brad was in on it too. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. My wife of 18 years, the woman I'd built a life with, was lying to my face while cavorting with not one, but two other men. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to do anything to release the storm brewing inside me. But I didn't. Instead, I waited. The next morning, Karen came downstairs, acting like everything was fine. She poured herself a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. Morning, she said without looking up. I didn't respond. She glanced at me, frowning. What's with the silent treatment? I set my mug down, staring at her. Are you sleeping with Brad? I asked bluntly. Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. What? She stammered. You heard me, I said, my voice cold. Are you sleeping with Brad? She laughed, but it sounded forced. You're crazy, she said, shaking her head. Why would you even think that? Because I saw the emails, I snapped. The ones where you're booking private court sessions with him. The ones where you're laughing and flirting like a couple of teenagers. Her jaw tightened, and she set her coffee down. You had no right to go through my emails, she said, her voice rising. And you had no right to cheat on me. I shot back. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might confess. But then her expression hardened. You're unbelievable, she said, grabbing her purse. I'm not doing this with you, Ethan. She stormed out of the house before I could stop her. I sat there, my hands shaking with anger and frustration. Her lies were piling up faster than I could keep track of, and every time I tried to confront her, she twisted things around to make me feel like the bad guy. But I wasn't the bad guy. I was the one being lied to. That afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove to the sports center where Brad worked, determined to confront him directly. When I got there, he was standing by the courts, talking to a group of women who were giggling like he was some kind of celebrity. I walked up to him, my heart pounding. Brad, I said, my voice steady. He turned to look at me, his smug grin faltering slightly. Ethan, right? That's me, I said. We need to talk. The women exchanged curious glances, but quickly dispersed, leaving us alone. What's this about? Brad asked, crossing his arms. It's about Karen, I said. His expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Nervousness, maybe? What about her, he asked. Are you sleeping with her? I demanded. He laughed, shaking his head. What? No. Where is this coming from? Don't lie to me, I snapped. I've seen the emails. I know about the private sessions. Just tell me the truth. He hesitated, his confident facade cracking. Look, he said, lowering his voice. Karen and I are friends. That's all. We've worked together for years. Friends, I repeated, my voice rising. Then why is she sneaking around with you? Why is she lying to me about where she's been? Brad sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Okay, he said finally. Maybe things got complicated. Complicated? I barked out a bitter laugh. What the hell does that mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around, like he was making sure no one else could hear. I don't know what she told you, he said carefully. But whatever's going on with her, it's not just me. What are you talking about? I demanded. Brad hesitated, then said something that made my blood run cold. You should talk to Brandon. My chest tightened. I already did, I said. Then you know, Brad said, his voice quiet. I stared at him, my mind racing. Know what? That evening, Karen came home acting like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and started making dinner like we were the picture-perfect family. But I wasn't playing along anymore. After the kids went to bed, I confronted her one last time. "Karen," I said, my voice steady. She looked up from her phone, frowning. "What?" "I talked to Brad," I said. Her face paled, and she set her phone down. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You heard me," I said. "He told me everything." Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head. "Ethan, I can explain." "Don't bother," I said, cutting her off. "I've had enough of your lies." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't feel sympathy. I felt anger. And then, for the first time, she said the words I'd been dreading. "I made a mistake." A mistake. That's what she called it. But it wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal, and I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her. Karen's sobs filled the room, her hands trembling as she tried to explain herself. But I wasn't interested in excuses anymore. Every word out of her mouth felt like another slap in the face, a reminder of how much she'd lied, how much she'd taken me for a fool. "A mistake?" I said bitterly, pacing the room. "Is that what you call sneaking around with Brad? Booking hotel rooms with Brandon? Lying to me, to our kids, to everyone who thought we had a real marriage?" She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. "Ethan, please." "No," I snapped, cutting her off. "You don't get to beg. Not after everything you've done." I didn't wait for her to respond. I grabbed the burner phone I'd found in her purse and threw it on the coffee table. "Explain this," I demanded. Her face went pale, and she stared at the phone like it was a ticking time bomb. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "That doesn't matter," I said coldly. "What matters is that it proves everything I already know. The texts, the hotels, the lies. You've been cheating on me, Karen, and I'm done pretending otherwise." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her cry. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt angry, betrayed, determined. The next morning, I set my plan into motion. While Karen was at the gym, her usual escape when things got tough, I went through her laptop again, collecting every piece of evidence I could find. Emails, calendar invites, text messages. I compiled it all into a neat little folder labeled Truth. Then I called Brad. He didn't answer, but I left a voicemail. "Meet me at the park at 3 p.m. We need to talk. If you don't show up, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been up to." Next, I called Brandon. To my surprise, he picked up on the first ring. "Ethan," he said, his tone cautious. "What do you want?" "You know exactly what I want," I said coldly. "Meet me at the park at 3 p.m., or I'll show your clients exactly what kind of personal trainer you really are." By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, I was sitting at a picnic table, the folder of evidence in my hands. Brad and Brandon showed up within minutes of each other, their expressions a mix of confusion and unease. "What's this about?" Brad asked, crossing his arms. "You know damn well what this is about," I said, slapping the folder onto the table. They exchanged nervous glances, but didn't say anything. I opened the folder, pulling out the emails and texts. "This," I said, holding up a printout of one of Brandon's texts to Karen, "is what it's about. This and everything else you've been hiding." Brandon's face reddened, and he looked away. Brad, on the other hand, had the audacity to smirk. "So what?" he said. "You're mad because your wife likes me better than you?" I stood up, my fist clenched. "You think this is funny?" I snapped. "You think destroying someone's marriage is a joke?" Brad shrugged, but he didn't say anything else. "I'm giving you both a choice," I said, my voice steady. "Either you stay the hell away from Karen and my family, or I take this evidence to your employers, your clients, and anyone else who needs to see it. You'll lose your jobs, your reputations, everything." Brandon paled. "You wouldn't." "Try me," I said coldly. They didn't argue after that. Brad walked away without another word, his cocky attitude finally gone. Brandon mumbled an apology before following him. When I got home, Karen was waiting for me, her face pale and drawn. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "Taking care of things," I said. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I don't want to hear it," I said sharply. "This marriage is over, Karen. I'm filing for divorce." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't stay to listen. I went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers, paperwork, and difficult conversations with the kids. Jake and Lily were devastated, and explaining the situation without giving them all the messy details was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But I got through it.